Good morning, everyone. I would be talking about the basics of electrodiagnosis in compression neuropathies or nerve injuries. As it is a very vast subject, I will touch upon certain points which appeared relevant to me. EMG and nerve conduction studies are extension of physical examination, we all know that. And what we expect from the EMG and nerve conduction study is that it should provide us data regarding site of injury, type of injury, severity, duration, and prognosis. But there are certain limitations and certain points to remember that nerve conduction studies and EMGs, they assess the physiology of the nerve. They are very operator dependent and very labor intensive procedures. So you should ask a very clear question to the electromyographer that what you want to know through this study. So it should not be non-contributory. But even after that, after trying everything, NCS and EMG can even be non-contributory in certain cases. So what are the type of nerve conduction studies? First, I will talk about sensory nerve conduction studies. The sensory nerve conduction studies can be both antidromic and orthodromic. That is the current we can stimulate in the direction, normal direction of impulse travel or against the direction of impulse travel. Typical nerves we examine are sural, ulnar, median, radial and superficial peroneal. What we see is, this is an example of normal median sensory nerve conduction study. What we see is one is distal latency, that is after stimulation and the upstroke of the waveform, the time interval is called distal latency. Then we see the amplitude and conduction velocity. We calculate the distance and divide it by the distal latency to get the conduction velocity. Now, what are the common applications of these sensory nerve conduction studies? The most common application, of course, is the most common entrapment neuropathy in carpal tunnel syndrome. In early carpal tunnel syndrome, there will be a myelin sheath compression. So, distal latency will be prolonged, conduction velocity will be prolonged. And as the compression becomes more severe, there will be an amplitude drop. But sometimes you get a normal median latency in carpal tunnel syndrome and there is a strong clinical suspicion. So what we can do is that we can do comparative study, like we can stimulate a fourth digit or a ring finger and record from median and ulnar both. Or we can stimulate an index finger and record from median and radial both. And then we see the comparative difference. And if it is significant, then we can say that yes, it is a definite carpal tunnel syndrome. Other common application is like preganglionic versus postganglionic brachial plexus injury. If the brachial plexus injury is preganglionic, it means that the dorsal nerve root ganglion is preserved. So if it is preserved, we will get a preserved SNAP because that sensory loop is intact. If the injury is postganglionic, then we don't get a preserved SNAP. So this is one point where it can help. Then sometime in site, determining the site also it can help. Like if a radial nerve injury and radial SNAP is preserved. So injury is slightly below because the superficial radial nerve has left before the nerve got injured. So these are some of the applications of sensory nerve conduction studies. Then we do motor nerve conduction studies where you stimulate a nerve and record from the muscle. And similarly here we also do the distal latency, amplitude and conduction velocity measurements. This is a typical median motor study where we stimulate the nerve distally and then proximally. We get CMAP from both the sides and we calculate the distal latency as we do in sensory. We calculate the conduction velocity by proximal latency and distal latency difference we will get and then the distance and then we will get the conduction velocity. What are its applications in compression or entrapment or nerve injury? It can help in assessing the severity of the nerve injury. More severe the nerve injury is, the more the amplitude drop is. And very severe nerve injury, you won't get any amplitude at all. Then type of neuropathy, whether it is axonal or demyelinating, we can know. Then another thing is a conduction block. Conduction block is a more than 50% drop in the amplitude. So it helps us in determining the site of injury, commonly ulnar neuropathy at elbow, you can do inching studies, and radial compressive neuropathies, we can do inching studies because these are relatively superficial nerves. So we can get the exact site of the entrapment. And secondly, carpal tunnel syndrome also, like in sensory, distal latency will be prolonged in early cases, and then after that, there will be an amplitude drop. These are F wave and H reflexes, not much useful, but sometime in radiculopathy, you will get a absent or a prolonged F reflex. What is a F wave? Actually, when we stimulate a nerve and record from the muscle get directly stimulated and we get an M, that is a CMAP. But that current goes retrograde also, goes up to the nerve, come back and stimulate the muscle again, and that potential is F. So if there is a radiculopathy, there will be a prolonged F wave. Now coming to the needle EMG techniques. In needle EMG, nerve conduction study is a EMG, but it is a surface EMG. And this is a needle EMG, where a needle is inserted into the muscle. And many muscles are accessible for examination. And in nerve injury, definitely we select the muscles which are relevant. And in generally myopathy and all, we select the muscles which are very easily accessible or superficial and all. Because a needle is put in the muscle, there is some level of discomfort. Many people usually will tolerate it, but sometimes will have difficulty. What we see in the needle EMG data. So when we insert the needle into the muscle, we see the insertional activity. Normally, very short-lasting insertional activity will be seen, but in a neurogenic muscles, insertional activity may be very prolonged. Then we see the spontaneous activity, that we have not activated the muscle, we have just put the needle, and we see what are the spontaneous activities seen. Normal muscle doesn't show any spontaneous activity. Then we see motor unit configuration, that we see when we activate the muscle, and then we see that what are the motor units and how they are recruiting and what is their interference pattern. So this come to spontaneous activity. The commonest spontaneous activity which we'll see are fibrillation potentials and positive sharp waves. These are signs of denervation. When the muscle gets denervated, the muscle fiber may spontaneously twitch, a single fiber or a small group of fibers, which will give rise to fibrillation potentials or positive sharp waves. So immediately after nerve injury, for first 3 to 6 days or a week, you may not get any denervation, and then you start getting denervation. Initially, the fibrillation potentials would be very high in amplitude. Gradually, they will decrease in amplitude. But even up to 9 months, you can get the evidence of denervation after the nerve injury. So, what are their application? The main application is that we want to find the evidence of denervation in the various muscles. So, we can get to know what is the site of the nerve injury. Paraspinal muscles like in brachial plexus and other root injuries, that if paraspinal muscles are showing denervation, then preganglionic lesion is more likely. Abductor pollicis brevis in CTS, if you put a needle in APB, and APB is showing some evidence of denervation, and other parameters are showing that carpal tunnel syndrome is very mild, but you should go for surgical release once denervation is seen. So I request you all that many of time we are getting carpal tunnel syndrome patient only NCV request. Very rarely we get a EMG request. So you should always request for EMG and you will identify more surgical candidates. And it helps in identifying the site of injury. Of course, like in radial nerve injury, brachioradialis and ECRL are spared, so injury is down. And if they are not spared, the injury is up. So by that way, sometime surgeons will request, just they want to know that muscle is healthy, whether it can be used for tendon transfer or not, and then they want to know the evidence of denervation. One practical problem is in this is that when we put needle in long flexors and extensors of forearms, we need to activate the muscle to put the needle in exactly proper place, because on surface anatomy sometimes we are not able to identify. If muscles are very weak, then sometimes it becomes difficult to identify the muscle, and we can put the needle in wrong muscle if muscle power is totally zero. So that's one technical problem is there. Then what is neurogenic motor units and see, I will just explain by giving you an example that suppose you have 200 pipes and 10 ropes to bind them in bundles. So you will bind a bundle of 20 pipes each in one rope. So if your ropes gets damaged and you get only 4 ropes and pipes are 200, so you will make a bundle of around 50 each. That bundle will be bigger and it will be a little deformed. So it will be like a neurogenic MUAP, where you have the MUP nerve units have become, motor units have become larger and deformed. And if pipes are damaged and ropes are spared, then you will get a myopathic MUAP, that is a smaller bundle. Now, what are the applications of this MUAP analysis? One common application is to see reinnervation. So, when we talk about reinnervation, what common understanding is that it is reinnervation, when it is written in EMG report, it means it is some repair, regeneration or recovery, but it may not. I remember when I joined my DM training in Nimhans, so I went to EMG lab with my third year and he was writing a report that this EMG is showing neurogenic pattern with evidence of denervation and evidence of reinnervation. And that patient was of motor neuron disease. So I asked him that it means the diagnosis is wrong because motor neuron disease is a degenerative disease and we are getting reinnervation. So he said no, these large MUAPs are considered as a evidence of reinnervation when we do EMG. So any chronically denervated muscle, you will see this large polyphasic MUAPs and we will write it as a reinnervation, but it not necessarily means that the actual recovery is taking place. So we have to be very careful in interpreting that. And second thing is that evidence of reinnervation can be seen only when muscle can be activated a bit, because without activating the muscle, we cannot see MUAPs. So if a muscle is very weak, almost zero power, and you want me to put a needle and tell you whether reinnervation is happening or not, it is very difficult. I can't tell you that. And what will happen in reinnervation is EMG wise that there will be one axonal regeneration, and axonal regeneration will cause some nascent MUAPs. Those are MUAPs will be small, but they will be polyphasics, and then there will second kind of reinnervation is neuronal sprouting, where we'll get large polyphasic MUAPs. But some amount of muscle activity is necessary to assess that. So what we expect from a EMG report is a clinical and physiological relevant diagnosis, outline of localization, severity, notation of other diagnosis, and explanation of the technical problems faced. So these are some indications, but the take-home message is that they are supplement to and not a replacement for history and physical examination. They are often time dependent because at different time of injuries we will get different findings and we have to interpret accordingly. And there are not standardized investigation like MRI, cervical spine or something like that. They have to be modified so we can answer the particular diagnostic problem. And communication between a surgeon and an electromyographer is a must to get good results. Thank you very much.